Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nicholas Mark, and I'm very happy to be here today to be invited by ST Properties to speak on the Singapore property market. Now, before I start, I once heard that someone said that in order to know a person, well, a man, well, there are three things that you can observe about him. One is the house that he lives in. Two is the job that he chooses for himself. And three, by looking at his shoes, the shoes that he wears. Notice I said men, not women, because some women can be very fascinated with shoes. I think I know more about the property market than I understand about some women's fascinations with shoes and handbags. And if you can just cast your mind back a bit, there are some women who may post pictures of themselves holding handbags on Facebook, and that can sometimes have great implications. Just think of Kate Spade. And if I may quote Oscar Wilde, an Irish playwright and author, he once said that women are to be loved, not understood. But to understand the property market, we do have to look at a few things. And the things that I'll be going through is, we'll go through a market overview, look at the affordability of private properties and the real price movement. What is the future supply and demand situation for the Singapore market? And we'll end off with an outlook and conclusion. The market overview. A lot has been said about the Singapore private property market and even HDB prices reaching a record high. It's true, it has. It's even higher than all the previous property peak in '96, in 2008, and now it's at the all-time high. But rental has not been catching up as much. Rental, represented by the blue line, is actually going at a slower pace for the last few years, which means that yields are being compressed. And there are investors who are willing to accept lower yield because in the current low interest rate environment, it seems like it is cheaper to buy, or make more sense to put your money into real estate than to put it in a bank and earn less than 1% interest. But in the last year or so, the sector that is actually propping up or supporting the price growth and the demand in the property market is actually the mass market segment. If we can divide the Singapore property market into three segments, the high-end segment in the prime district, core central region, the mid-end segment in the city fringe or rest of central region, RCR for short, and the mass market segment, which is typically your more suburban condominiums. You see the green line that is representing the OCR, the mass market. That is the price that has been going up, while the red line representing the prime districts, prices in the prime district, is actually flat, and in the last 9 months or so, it has been actually trailing downwards. And based on the latest statistics that's released on Friday, even the mid-end segment prices are starting to come down. If we were to zoom in a bit more on that previous trend, just looking at it from 2009 to now, it becomes even more evident that the green line, which is the mass market prices, are growing steadily upwards. And this is partly contributed by the cooling measures that the government has implemented. Now, if you were to buy a $8 million or $10 million property in the District 9, 10, or 11, you are actually paying a lot of money to the government just upfront. So some people switch from that segment to the mid-end, and some people from mid-end go and look for properties in the OCR, especially those that are located near MRT stations. In developer sales, primary market developer sales, it has also been dominated by the mass market, which is represented by the green column. And if it is not for the mass market, I think the whole Singapore property market would have corrected by now. It is the mass market that is one, holding up prices, and it is also holding up the sales demand. And last year, developers made a record sales. Almost 22,000 private homes sold. Never in the history of Singapore has so many private homes been sold. And I don't think this record will be broken anytime soon. Not this year. In the first 9 months of this year, developers sold close to about 12,000 over private homes. I think at best, it will probably be about the same as 2011 or 2010 or 2011 figures. So is it because so much sales and so on, is it because properties are getting very affordable? It was not too long ago that the Singapore government has our conversation Singapore, and one of the topics that come out is property getting less affordable. First of all, I did a study about looking at the real price growth. Although a lot has been said about prices reaching record high, private home prices reaching record high, which is in this case represented by the red line. The blue line is the real rate of growth. That means the private property prices after taking away inflation. And actually, the prices has been rather flat in the last 2 years or so. And if you were to look at the rate of change in real terms, there are times when it can plunge, like for example, during financial crisis, and then during the market recovery, it can shoot up. But in the last 2 years or so, it has been flirting in the positive and negative area. In other words, in real terms, private property is actually going rather flat. And a lot has been said about property being a good hedge against inflation. Yes, it is. It can be. It can probably grow at about the same rate as inflation most of the time. But in this case, there's been a lot of government interference in the Singapore property market, and the government is trying to cool it down. If it's not for all the cooling measures, probably we'll be seeing the properties growth more in the positive territory. What about affordability? When I look at this, before I start comparing affordability, I was expecting probably private properties not being that affordable, but surprisingly, it is. It is been affordable when you compare it with the median household income. And the reason is because the median household income has been rising faster than the rate of property price increase. You can see here, it has basically, other than during the recession period, it has been rising quite steadily, faster than property prices. So as a result, private properties are actually fairly affordable, especially to the top 20 to 30%, which are typically the segment of our population that will be looking to invest or to buy a private property for their own stay. I think there's also growing awareness that there is quite a lot of supply in the pipeline. Supply as in those units that are under construction now and could be completed in the next few years. You just need to go around certain towns, like for example, Punggol, Sengkang area, especially Punggol, and now parts of Pasir Ris. Almost at every road junction, you will see some construction yard, or you'll come across some cement trucks, because that whole area is like one big construction area. So how much supply is there? The red columns represent the historical supply that has come into the market, while the green columns are the future supply in the next 4 years or so. And the blue line represents the vacancy rate. We can see that vacancy rate in the last year has been increasing. But what is most a matter of concern is actually the large supply that is expected to be completed. Because the government in the last 3 years, in one of the attempts to try to cool the market and also to meet rising demand, is to sell more and more land. And this land, the developers buy them over, build them, launch them. Of course, they have to build what? They have to, after selling it, the units, of course, they have to build. And all these units are going to get TOP in the next few years. And we are going to see a lot of supply. But if you have a lot of supply, it will not be a problem if you have the demand to occupy those units. And that demand actually comes from population, the resident population, the people who are actually living in Singapore, both citizens and PR. Now, the blue columns represents our actual population historically, and the orange column represents expected future growth in population. Now, assuming that actually our population growth has been fairly stable, at times it may be a bit faster when the Singapore government opens up the welcome more foreigners here, make it easier to apply for PR or EP or other type of employment visas. But so assuming that it is still growing at the same rate, in about 4 years' time, we will be coming close to almost a population of 6 million people. Remember when the white government released the white paper and they mentioned a number of 6.9 million people, there was a lot of uneasiness about it. Well, we could be reaching that 6 million mark in a few years if population continue to expand. This is actually quite a bit of a bullish projection because the government, we will be having a general election somewhere in 2015, 2016. So whether will the government allow population to grow at this rate is questionable. But suppose it does, our population do grow at this rate. Will it be enough to absorb the large amount of supply that is coming up? And assuming that our family formation rate, the number of weddings and so on, marriages, still, it's also quite a stable rate. Typically, it's a bit more when the economy is in a boom. There will be less marriages when the economy is in recession. But on the whole, it balances out to 20 over 1,000 marriages a year. The answer is that based on these assumptions, it will still not be enough to absorb all the supply that is coming up. We can estimate the amount of new supply is actually represented by the yellow column, while the purple column represents the expected demand. So we could see a lot of vacant units unless something is done about it. So some of the current cooling measures, if you were to consider buying a Singapore property, especially for investment, these are some of the measures that you have to consider and that is in force at the moment. But in the last few years, when the government comes up with the cooling measures, it tends to have a very short-term effect. Every time, if let's say some of the cooling measures been implemented, the next month, volume will drop. It may drop for even 2 months, but then after that, you'll start to recover again. All until the TDSR is implemented on the 29th of June this year. And that is when volume drops and it hasn't really recovered yet. So the outlook. If you're buying a property for investment, one of the important things to ask yourself is what is the rental return and what kind of capital appreciation can you expect? If rental return is very low, then there is a possibility that prices will not be supported. And even some of the captains of industry, such as Mr. Chia, who was formerly the COO of Far East, and Mr. Kwek has also mentioned that, well, prices could be at the turning point, a point of inflection, and it could even drop about 5% till next year. But there are certain factors that are pointing towards a bit of status quo, that prices could continue to grow, steady economic growth in Singapore. In the last 20 years, a sustained drop in property prices is often accompanied by economic recession. It's only when our economy is doing very badly, when investor confidence are at the low point, that is when property prices drop. And if we do not have such a situation, like there's no sign of a recession or financial crisis, the chances of a sustained and prolonged property price decline the chances are very slim. And furthermore, if household income continue to rise, prices could also be supported. But on the other hand, okay, this is where this chart basically represents comparing the GDP against our property prices. And actually, it does shows that whenever we have a recession period, like for example, from 2001 to 2003, okay, that is when the economic growth, it was growing sometimes, but in 2003, we actually had the technical recession. You do get a rather depressed property market. But when the economy were to expand rapidly, so does our property prices. And on the other hand, there are factors that can also point towards a turning point in property prices, such as our property cycle is actually reaching a mature phase. HDB resale prices and COV are falling. And actually, the HDB resale market forms a floor, a support for the mass market, right? A lot of the buyers of mass market, even executive condominium, are HDB upgraders. Rental growth is still growing, but it is rather weak. And that large future supply that is coming on stream in the next 3 to 4 years is going to put downwards pressure on rental, and this could in turn turn away investors, especially if interest rate were to increase. The US Federal Reserve say that they will not increase interest rates probably until 2015, but they could consider tapering the QE, the amount of money that they are printing and releasing into the market. So that could in turn affect the amount of liquidity and interest rates on our shores. The property market moves in cycles. It's like the seasons. There will be a time for growth, a time when things are very bright and sunny, and there will also be a time of maturity and probably a time of decline. So we have to take that as part of life. And in conclusion, for investors, there's a time to buy and there's a time to sell, okay? If you don't realize your investment, the capital gain in your investment, then basically, unless you buy it at a very low rate, at a very low price, okay, no problem. But bear in mind that there will be times that you may have to consider it's better to sell than to buy. So for property agents out there, you may also have to consider, are you serving your client well? Because I know that there are people out there who are always in a sell side, always on the sell side. That means they are always trying to sell properties, right? So they cannot tolerate bad news that recommend people not to buy. But there is a time to buy and there's a time to sell. So some of these people may give certain motherhood statements, like for example, oh, Singapore, there will still be people interested to buy in Singapore because of our strong political system, because we have a strong rule of law and so on. But such situation, such characteristic of Singapore does not actually prevent the property market from correcting. So when you talk to some people, you may also have to ask yourself, whose interests are they actually promoting? And seek more than one opinion and to think independently, right? I'd like to end off with this certain story. This is actually an actual story that happened to me some months ago when I was speaking at the property seminar. At the end of the property seminar, end of my speech anyway, I was going to the toilet, and I noticed there was someone following me because I did show them these slides that say that, look, if you have any questions, you can call me at the office. We do provide consultancy service for a very reasonable fee of just a few $1,000s. Anyway, while I was in the toilet, this person was standing not too far away watching me, and it's a bit unnerving trying to do your business when there's someone watching you. But when after finishing washing my hands and coming out, he came up to me and said, hey, Mr. Mark, I got some questions for you. And I was actually late for another appointment. I have to go somewhere else. So I thought, okay, give him time for one question. So he started asking me, is it good to buy in this area? Is it good to buy this 2-bedroom or what? And then I was wondering, okay, I'll try to find some background. Why are you buying? Is it for your own stay or for investment? And he said it's for investment. It's for his son, for legacy planning. So I don't think, I suspect it's because at the time you can still use, the parents can still use their adult children's name to buy property to circumvent the ABSD. So this guy wants to save on his consultancy fee, he wants to save on ABSD, and he says it's for legacy planning, but I wonder what kind of legacy is he planning if he can stalk someone all the way to the toilet. Please don't be that person. Okay, with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.